Good morning and welcome to our live webinar, Grantmaking in a Volatile Market, hosted by PKF O'Connor Davies. All attendees are in listen mode only. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's call. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface, and you should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop in the upper right corner. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions in the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the webcast. We have a lot of material to cover, and if time permits, we will make an effort to respond. If we cannot get to your questions, a response will be sent post-event. This webinar is offering 1 CPE credit in specialized knowledge, and you will need to respond to 4 polling questions to receive credit. If you're having difficulty responding to a question, it is recommended you come out of full screen mode to respond. CPE credit certifications will be issued within 8 to 10 days via email. A recording of today's webinar will be made available to you via email a few hours after the event. At the end of the webinar, we do have a very short survey which will be prompted, and your response is greatly appreciated. At this time, I would like to introduce Anan, Samara, and Scott Brown, partners with PKF O'Connor Davies. Anan and Scott.
Thank you, Harleen. Good morning, everyone. We want to thank you all for joining us here today for a discussion on grant making in the volatile market. A topic, of growing interest and concern to many, not only private foundations and philanthropists, but also grantees as well. We have a little over 200 registered for today's webinar, so we are pretty excited to go ahead and get started. A brief introduction. My name is Anan Samara. I am a partner with the private foundation practice at PKF O'Connor Davies. With me today is my co-host and partner, Scott.
Thank you, Anan.
We work with a little over 500 private foundations in our practice. More and more, we're getting questions about the various strategies foundations are implementing in terms of grant making. We're getting questions about how our foundations navigate in the current market conditions. Should we increase our grant making for the year, or should we cut back to preserve our endowment? All very important questions. Thinking back, I think not since 2008 financial crisis did we find ourselves in a market such as the market here today. And still, today still feels a little different. Not only we have volatility in the market, but also we have a banking crisis. Another added layer of uncertainty to you as foundations, philanthropists, but also to your grantees. Today, we do have 2 expert panelists combined, have a little over 4 decades of experience working with private foundations, philanthropists, and public charities. Our first panelist I'll introduce is Amy Holmes. Amy is a director with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Currently, Amy leads the New York advisory team for RPA and directs strategic planning and program development for philanthropists and foundations. Welcome, Amy. Also with us as a panelist today is Richard Ribeiro. Rich is the Chief Financial and Operations Officer of the Turrell Fund, a grant-making foundation that is also very involved with the grantees, not only simply making grants to their various grant recipients, but also being involved in direct travel activities, meaning boots in the ground, working with the grantees in terms of educating those grantees in various areas. Moderating today's panel is our very own Joe Ali. Joe is also a partner in our practice. I think one of many key takeaways from today's session is that not every foundation is the same. Foundations are different missions, and achieve their purpose in many different ways. So there's not going to be a right or wrong strategy for every foundation. It's not a one size fits all. I think that's very important to keep in mind. Before I turn it over to Joe, I just want to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded and it will be available on our website, along with prior webinars and symposiums that we've done, along with our monthly private foundation bulletins. With that said, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Great. Yep, thanks, Anan. Welcome everyone to this timely quarterly webinar. As Anan mentioned, my name is Joe Ali. I'm a partner in the private foundation practice. It was really great to see so many familiar names signed up. I think we had over 200 registrants, and I know for a lot of these folks, this probably might be, we'll do some Peloton milestones, right? So whether it's your 10th webinar with us, I know people used to count how many private foundation symposiums they used to come to in person. But again, like I said, really good to see so many familiar names and friends and clients alike. I'm very happy to say that I've known both of our speakers for well over 10 years, working alongside them with various foundations during that time. We had a lot of really good discussions during our planning sessions, and those planning sessions probably could have been a fireside chat in and of themselves. So we're going to try to recapture some of that today for you all. And you know, there was a lot of good stuff in there. So again, maybe there's just a few nuggets of information that you can take away, take back to your foundations, take back to your clients, take back to whatever role you play in these types of discussions. As far as a webinar title is concerned, we were a little more prescient than we wanted to be with the use of the term volatile market in the title. I think we titled this in late February, just about what we've been seeing and hearing from our clients, and then the invitation went out on March 3rd, just a few days before what took place between March 8th and the 12th with the banking sector. So you know, we were joking about it the other day. Maybe we need to title a future webinar something along the lines of how to keep up with grant making in a prolonged bull market with moderate inflation, and see what happens. I'm sure most people on the call would probably sign up for that magic 8-ball outcome. But with that said, I want to get right into it. But first, we're just going to go through 2 quick polling questions. So Harleen, if you could launch those, then we'll get into it. So if everyone can quickly respond to this one, just so that we know if you're looking for CPE credit or not. We know a few of our clients maintain their credentials, and always good to pick up some easy middle of the day CPE. So we'll give that another few seconds. All right, and going into we'll close that one and going into the next question, just to get us a little bit of a feel on how everyone's thinking. So I'll read that out loud. How has the current market impacted your foundation's decision making? And we'll give that another 20 seconds. All right, and we're going to close that one out too, Harleen. All right, thank you. So thank you, Rich and Amy, for being part of this discussion with us here today. You know, given the current situation and what your conversations have been like, given the volatility over the past few quarters, culminating with the banks in recent weeks, you know, Rich, we'd kind of like to start with you. So I guess, how is this factored into the current grant process at your foundation, and what are those conversations starting to look like?
Yeah, Joe, thank you. It's most definitely has impacted the decision-making process at the Turrell Fund. You know, in anticipation of reduced funding or grants for the upcoming cycles, and I'll get into that in a second. You know, there's a few things that we've done to basically communicate to our clients, which is grantees, that there might be a possibility that they will receive reduced funding, or possibly, you know, not a grant during this cycle. You know, some of the things that we've done is we've sent out an email blast to our client base just to alert them that there is this possibility. And our thinking there is, you know, one of the things that we hear from our grantees all the time is, we wish you would have, you know, told us in advance that you were considering, you know, reducing, or there was a strong chance that we weren't going to get a grant. So that way we can seek out other funders and you know, adapt to that change. So that's definitely one thing that we've done well in advance of the grant cycle decision-making process, which for us is in May and November. In addition to that, we've also put a notification on our website. So, you know, the applicants go onto our website to apply for a grant, and, you know, before they get into the portal, they get the notification just alerting them of the possibility or anticipation of reduced funding for the upcoming cycles. Again, we're all about communication. We're all about advance notice. That way they're not surprised with a letter in the mail saying that they didn't receive the grant. In addition to that, we've also had a lot of in-depth conversations, team discussions internally about what the upcoming grant cycle is going to look like, what the numbers are, where they're going to fall, where we're going to have to do some tough decisions, talk about our mission critical grantees, because every year there's certain grantees that we have that are, very important to our mission that we feel is important. Now we communicate any changes in funding in advance. So those are some of the things that we've been doing, most recently because of the current market conditions. But just to provide a little context to the audience here of what the Turrell Fund grant budget looks like and what the process looks like. We have an annual grant budget of approximately $4 million. We utilize a trailing 12-quarter average. And one of the reasons why we use a trailing 12-quarter average is really to smooth out the peaks and valleys of the market volatility. So that way the impact isn't as drastic as it needs to be. And we also have a spend rate that the board has given to us, which is approximately 5.3% of a spend rate. And in some cases where we're spending, and there's a reason why it's over the 5% mandate, where we're spending over that 5% mandate, we create some excess distributions where we might need to reduce some of our grant making or utilize some of that excess distribution in order to reduce some of our grant making. We typically don't do that. Our board typically doesn't like to do that, but the option is there. And that's the important part, is that there is an option if we needed to utilize it. So that's just some background on the Turrell Fund's budget and grant process.
Great. And Amy, maybe you can, maybe whether you want to start with some giving strategies, the foundations that you're working with, or maybe get into, some of the things that you've been encountering as of late in light of everything.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Rich. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Holmes. I'm the director of our advisory service practice at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors here in New York. And so in this role, we advise many different donors and giving entities of all kinds, including a lot of family foundations. We help them plan and implement their charitable giving. So we kind of serve in that executive director and program officer role for many different foundations across the country and around the world. And this time of year is typically when we're meeting with our clients to plan for the rest of the year. We look at budgets, we look at priorities, we look at any changes that are coming. And we do that so that we can, help them think through or, plan for any differences, new developments that they want to make in the coming year. And I'd say in almost every case, those planning meetings that we've had in the last couple of months have involved changes, looking at volatility that's happening in the market. And the response in these cases have largely been to try to pull back, to try to use, somewhat diminished grant making budgets in a way that's responsible, in a way that still fulfills the foundation's mission, but, looks at kind of the reality of uncertainty that everyone's facing right now. And as Rich does at his foundation, we also do this planning so that we can communicate any changes to grantees as soon as possible to let them know, certainly, if cases where they may not get an expected grant this year, but also to tell them that, what we try to do maybe more often is to make a final grant so that at least the organization, if we are going to part ways with them, might, have that final year of funding before the funding relationship ends. So we try to stay ahead of any changes and communicate as soon as we can about changes that are going to be coming up over the coming year. And it's been interesting to me actually to notice this year that in most cases, funders are responding to volatility by tightening up and pulling back. In other recent cases, I think about like 2020 while COVID was happening and there was tremendous uncertainty in, the market crash of 2008. Those were, I think, more dire economic situations than we may be in right now. And we saw many of our clients actually choosing to give more. Their concern at those times was less about their own endowments and their own budgets and more about the sustainability of grantees that they really cared about because things were so unpredictable and so dire. So the fact that we're now seeing, I think more of our clients are, realize that there is uncertainty. We're unclear. Are we moving into a recession? Are we not? And they're tightening their own budgets, in responsible ways to maintain their own stability, and doing what they can to keep strong relationships with their grantees. But to me, that indicates that, many of our foundations and investment, endowment investment boards may be thinking that things are less dire than they may have been in those earlier instances.
Speaking of relationships with grantees, I know one of the things that we talked about, Rich, was some of the ways that that your foundation, some alternatives, as it were, to classic grant making with regards to being, advocates for your grantees and interacting with them. Can you speak about some of that?
Absolutely, Joe, and that's an area that I'm very passionate about, and I feel lucky that that the Turrell Fund allows me to build these relationships with our grantees, because I'm not a program person, as you know. I have a financial background, but it is something that, they want, the Turrell Fund wants me to do with our grantees, which are things like workshops and seminars, educational workshops and seminars, direct charitable activities, and the thought process there really is the impact that these seminars and workshops have for our grantees outside of a grant. When we think about the workshops that we do at the Turrell Fund, we rent some space. We probably bring in about 30 or 40 grantees, and we've covered topics of, how to better market your organization through your 990. With our grantees, you'd be surprised how many of our grantees view a 990 as just a IRS tax compliance form. And I do remind them that it goes way beyond that. It's a document that every foundation asks for when filling out an application. Gives the funder an opportunity to really learn more about the organization as it relates to the programs that they are able to market through the 990, as it relates to good governance practices, which is on your page 6 of your 990. So that's just one example of one of the workshops that we do. We also do a workshop where we bring in industry leaders in the early childhood or early child care arena to just basically update the grantees on best practices as it relates to child care. And they find that very useful. In addition to that, we bring in grant writers, grant writing consultants to help our grantees, because a lot of our grantees for the Turrell Fund, they're small nonprofits, and they don't have the luxury of having, not all of them have the luxury of having like a professional development person. Not all of them have the luxury of having a CPA, full time. So anytime we get an opportunity to, put these workshops together, it has great impact, and we look at it as, maybe, through these workshops, they would receive a grant from another foundation that they wouldn't have received otherwise if they didn't pick up some of these best practices through these educational seminars. In addition to that, we also network for them because the Turrell Fund is part of these collaborative groups where we update each other, the foundations update each other on projects that they're working on. And if we see a fit for a project that another foundation is working on and we have a grantee that actually fits the bill, we'll share that information. So we do some marketing for them and fundraising on their behalf. In addition, another strategic item or thing that we do at the Turrell Fund is when one of our grantees is having a gala. What we typically do is we purchase a table and we fill that table with our grantees. And the idea there is to give them an opportunity to market and network their work with other organizations that are at these galas and other foundation executives. So that's something that we're very proud of and very passionate about doing. And if that doesn't come through in my excitement of explaining it, I don't know what does. But anyway, yeah, so those are some of the things we do outside of grant making.
Great, thanks, Rich. And then just kind of circling back, I think, Amy, I mean, we talked about communication and the idea of, you know, being very clear if something maybe perhaps is a final grant, you know, and that kind of concept. That's one of those concepts that I actually learned from you over the years, listening to you, you know, facilitate meetings. But you know, when it comes to what are you seeing with multi-year grants, conditional versus unconditional grants, and I mean, we don't want to go you know, too far into it, but also thinking about it with regards to like equity and grant making, so on and so forth. So I was just curious in terms of what are you seeing with multi-year grants, conditional, unconditional, in the current environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So something that we started seeing really across the field, largely during COVID, and that I'm thankful to see that it's continued, is greater flexibility from funders. I think you know, in 2020 there was a lot of you know, restricted grants those restrictions being lifted because things suddenly became so incredibly unpredictable. Organizations needed all the resources they had available to kind of do their work in whatever the best way was, because things were changing so quickly. So we still do see more funders who are open to general operating support, you know, understanding that the organizations, especially those they have known for a while and have a good trusting relationship with, that they can use those funds the best way possible if they have the maximum flexibility. So still fewer restricted grants. I will say that while there was a time a few years ago that multi-year grants became more common, I'm starting to see those just this year become less common. I think it's just related to market volatility. You know, with greater uncertainty about what grant making budgets will be this year, next year, many of our clients are a little less likely right now to enter into multi-year grants. They're sometimes kind of thankful when multi-year grants that they may have made, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago are coming to an end, because now they'll be able to use those funds more flexibly themselves as an institution. So I think there's continued interest in making their grantees' lives easier and giving them access to resources, you know, that with flexible dollars. But multi-year may be taking a bit of a hit this year. But like Rich, we also engage in a lot of those, you know, non-grant activities, like making connections to other funders, you know, making introductions that would be helpful. You know, and really that's especially true for those really mission critical grantees. I think right now a lot of our foundations are having to prioritize. You know, if their grant making budget this year is not what it was in recent years, sometimes they want to enter into it as just, you know, cutting every grantee across the board by a certain amount. But that kind of strategy, I think, very often goes by the wayside, and it really becomes much more about priorities and deciding that, you know, a certain set of grantees are really critical to our mission. We're going to maintain our funding at a consistent level, and then, you know, find other grantees that maybe we can part ways with, you know, either through receiving a final grant, or, you know, maybe they have the sustainability that they could accommodate a reduced grant level for the next 1 or 2 years, so that the funder can really maintain those top priority relationships with grantees with consistent funding. So that's the strategy that we're kind of counseling our clients through most often.
And Joe, if you don't mind me just jumping in here, I know there's supposed to be a fireside chat, you know, and so what Amy touched on, there's a few things that she touched on that I know that we've implemented. One in particular that struck me is the changing the restrictions on the grants from, you know, purpose-driven to general ops. We saw that big change in 2020 with COVID. we changed all our grants to general ops. We didn't want to handcuff them with, restricted grants that maybe the programs had to be put on pause because of COVID. The other thing that Amy mentioned that sort of reminded me of the exercises that we do is Amy mentioned about reducing the grant budget, a set percentage for all. And we went through that exercise and we totally put it off. This doesn't work. This is not fair. And we started taking a deeper dive into all our grantees and having interviews with them. Be surprised how many of the interviews that we had when we had a discussion with the organization that certain programs that they applied for were put on pause because they didn't get enough funding for it. So then that made it easier for us to say, okay, well then, if that program's on pause until next year, we're going to put your grant on pause for now and be able to then reduce some of our grant budget by just having these conversations and interviews with our grantees. So I felt like I needed to jump in because Amy brought up things that I've recently lived at the Turrell Fund, so I wanted to share that.
Great.
And I'll just respond to your thoughts, Rich. Who needs Joe? Thank you for moderating, Joe. But I like just having a direct conversation with you as well, Rich. I don't know, don't turn your camera off. But that conversation was, the idea of having those open conversations with your grantees, I think is so important. Something that when our clients are amenable to it, and when times are tight and when organizations are really, using all their resources for maximum efficiency, we'll tell them, it's okay for you to send us to recycle a proposal. If you have a general op proposal that you made for somebody else, that's fine. We know you well enough. Send us something. If you have a report that you made for somebody else, just send us that. You don't have to create brand new all materials for us when you already have something that you've made for somebody else. And that happened especially during COVID, but in some cases it's continued on. And also, if you are really struggling right now as an organization with so much uncertainty, if especially a very kind of smaller capacity, smaller budget organization, if a 45-minute phone call can serve in lieu of a formal written report, that may also be good enough. So, we try to kind of take flexibility, have flexibility on our side as well as a funder when our clients are okay with this approach to, kind of not waste their time, and let them do their work, let them use the money that we're giving them to do their work and to achieve their mission, and not have to, take as much time on formal written materials if something else is just as good.
Right. Totally makes sense.
Great. So if I'm allowed back at the fireside chat, just, we talked about, I think it's really always great to hear. And again, we always say we're not judge or jury, right? So these shifts, these changes that we see, it's really what we're hearing from the foundation community. But at the same time, there's always at least some level of due diligence, right? So whether we convert something from a very restricted grant to a general operating grant, so on and so forth, relaxed reporting, all the different things that we've seen a little bit over the last 2-3 years. There still are many foundations that they have their risk assessment process, they have their risk mitigation, their general due diligence, as it were. And I guess just with everything going on with regards to the financial health of nonprofits, with everything going on, is there any point of view with regards to any changes in your due diligence process or anything else that you're thinking about? We'll start with you, maybe Rich.
So as it relates to due diligence, our due diligence hasn't changed because of the market volatility. It is what it is, but we find ourselves in more in-depth conversations and interviews with our grantees to really get a sense of the program that they're applying for a grant, or a grant for the program that they have applied for. Because as Amy said, then we try to prioritize. Okay, maybe this is high on our list and not as high, somewhere else, where we put a pause on the grant for that application. But as it relates to the financial due diligence, that's still the same. I think it's important for me to note here that for us, we don't require, if an organization is not required to have an audit, by regulators, then we don't require them to go out and have an audit. And those are, as you know, mostly smaller nonprofits. So we're not going to put that financial burden or stress on them, but they do still need to submit financial statements if it's internal financial statements. But we definitely go through the due diligence process there as it relates to the application. And, you know, we basically go, when trying to decide if a grantee or an applicant is going to get a grant and we have one that's neck and neck, then the due diligence that we apply to both of them is going to play a role in the decision. And the case that I can think of most recently, we had that situation. One applicant had submitted audited financial statements. They were pretty recent. The other applicant had submitted audited financial statements. They're a little older. So the information was a little stale. And we reached out to them to make sure, you know, hey, did you send us the wrong year? Unfortunately, they hadn't completed their audit yet. So that played a role in the decision-making process. But to answer your question, pretty long-winded here, Joe, but to answer your question, our due diligence hasn't changed because of the market volatility. It is what it is. But I find that we're a little tougher when we have to tighten our belts in making decisions and based on our review process.
Great, thanks. And I think that covers like the financial due diligence. I was wondering if maybe Amy can kind of speak to, you know, those are some really tough conversations. You used a term earlier, you know, deciphering between what's a mission critical grant versus a different type of grant, what have you. And when, you know, a foundation does ultimately make the decision that it is going to trim or prune or cut back or reallocate, et cetera, can you just kind of speak to some of those conversations and like what you look at when you coach or facilitate those discussions around considering mission critical grants versus, you know, other nice to haves or what have you?
Sure. So, you know, a lot of the foundations that we've been talking with just this year are thinking of the current volatility as lasting, you know, a couple of years. So they know that, you know, better times will be coming. They can, you know, be more generous in their grant making, more expansive in their priorities down the road. But for right now, there may be a time of belt tightening. So it's really the conversation I think that you're referring to, Joe, has to start with the foundation thinking about itself and what it wants to accomplish, what its priorities are in the short term, in the next couple of years. So thinking about what's most important for, you know, the field that you care about, the populations you care about, the geographies you care about, what are the stressors or the challenges that those places or people are going to be facing right now, and then kind of making adjustments to your program based on what you see as a funder and, you know, what you're trying to achieve through your philanthropy. So starting there, and then once that, you know, clarity or fine tuning has taken place, then take a look at your grants list, you know, for the coming year and think about, you know, kind of like who's still really aligned in the highest possible way with what your goals are as a funder, and who's maybe a little less aligned, and, you know, who when they're thinking about what's coming up for them in the next year in their work, it's not quite, you know, on target with what the foundation is trying to do. So it's really about finding those matches or areas where, you know, there may be some mismatching, and knowing that any, you know, shifts in funding due to market volatility won't be forever. You know, that like relationships can be restarted, funding, you know, grant making budgets can be restored to previous levels. It's really about just kind of making some tough decisions for the short term. So that's how a lot of our conversations have gone.
Great, thanks. And I guess it kind of ties into both of these things, but really more something that came up in the middle of the month. I mean, we put out a private foundation bulletin about how, you know, everything that's going on with the banking sector, you know, is kind of ripe for bad actors, as it were, to try to, you know, prey on this particular situation. So I'm sure both of you, and again, I know we have a whole bunch of folks on the call still, and I'm sure there's a population of them that do paper checks, a population of them that do wires, and again, during the pandemic, many of the holdouts on the paper checks, you know, converted over to wires and so on and so forth. But I know we still have a few. that have that, but I'm just curious in terms of what types of extra caution, precaution is being taken with regards to the foundations you work with, Amy, and Rich, what you're doing at Turrell with regards to making grants via wire or considering wire updates that are coming across from potential grantees.
Yeah, well, I will say that, many of our clients have been giving to organizations consistently for many years. So the kind of extra level of checking we would do for making, wire payments to those is if they suddenly come to us with a change in account, we may do a phone verification, get through to somebody and just, kind of do a verbal check on any change in banking information that's come to us, especially if it's an organization we've known for a long time. Those verbal checks are usually pretty quick and easy. I will say RPA also has a fiscal sponsorship practice where we hold funds and make grants directly on behalf of often donor collaboratives or other philanthropic initiatives. And we actually do a verbal phone check on every single payment for ACH. So there is a higher level of checking that we're doing because of some of those bad actors that you're mentioning, Joe.
So Joe, as it relates to that, the Turrell Fund's still a dinosaur. We don't issue grants via ACH or wire. Everything is a check that goes out the door as it relates to that. In addition to writing a check out the door, we also have what's called positive, what's it called?
Positive pay.
Anyway, what positive pay? That's it. Positive pay, where I have to enter the information into our financial institution's portal that matches the check going out. And I can tell you that a few times I've gotten a call where a fraudster has gotten a hold of one of our checks and made blank checks and try to get those cashed. But because of this positive pay, they weren't able to actually get that check cashed. So again, we are a dinosaur in that. This is a discussion actually that comes up every year because we'll have a grantee who reached out, Rich, can we get a wire? Can you wire, ACH? Nope, I can't do it. I'm not doing it. And, one of the thought processes that I have as it relates to that is I have to collect their banking information, right? Their account number, routing number, and so forth. And God forbid we get hacked and that information gets out. I like to sleep at night. I don't know about you, but I like to sleep at night. So, I'm going to stick with the grant writing. The check writing as it relates to that. So.
Great. Thank you both. Appreciate that. So in our last, 10 minutes or so before we turn it over to Q&A, I really like to kind of open up the floor, as it were, to recent trends, what we're seeing more of now, what we're seeing less of, just as it pertains to the philanthropic model as a whole, grant making, how we're thinking about it, and any other items that have kind of come up during the course of this talk that you wanted to share with us. Amy?
Yeah, trends that we see that have been in place for a couple of years, and I see only deepening our commitment to social justice, gender justice, especially since last year, racial justice, especially since 2020, just donors wanting to use the resources that they have now to address issues that they really see as kind of critical to our country, and that they see it, so many things are developing so quickly in so many kind of social and economic arenas of our country that donors are wanting to take fast action to address some of those concerns and be much more kind of responsive and proactive in their grant making. So I see those as trends that they're saying. A lot of donors are kind of inspired by other donors like Mackenzie Scott, who are kind of taking quick action, putting big dollars into issues that she's identified as being critical to our democracy and to this, to our country, and kind of moving fast. So that kind of style of philanthropy, I think, has had an influence on the field.
For us, as it relates to trends, Amy hit the mark on, more funding going towards social justice, human rights, DEI is another area that we're deeply involved with. Loosening our grant restrictions, as I mentioned earlier before, from restricted grants or program restricted grants to general ops as it relates to that. But I think the other trend that I'm seeing a lot with our peer foundations is really the cultivating of relationships between the funder and the grantees. I feel like years ago, there was this mindset that, hey, we're the funder, we're the one with the money. You do what we say with our money. And I don't see that anymore. I see more of a partnership as it relates to funders and its grantees. And I think by having that partnership, it just strengthens change and impact in communities because they don't feel like they're in it alone. They feel like there's a partnership and they're in it together. So that's a trend that I've been seeing more lately in the recent years. That's all I got.
Okay. Anything more on sunsetting? I know that was a topic that we talked about. Just anything?
Yeah, sort of a newer trend, something that maybe is kind of more out on the horizon is more donors thinking about their time horizon. I know I've heard from Rich that this is a topic of kind of regular discussion at his foundation as well. We're definitely seeing, I think, an increase in donors who maybe it's in part related to volatility and unpredictability of grant making budgets and endowments, is trying to kind of use today's dollars to address today's problems and deciding to spend down. Not often that quickly. We've had some foundations that have already made that decision and have come to us saying, we need help spending down our entire endowment over the next 2 to 3 years. We've had other foundations who we've worked with for a long time who have kind of made the decision, either for kind of family multi-generational reasons or for, just kind of like, let's make a big impact now with the resources that we have. We're opting to sunset, and to do that in a thoughtful and planful and responsible way. But impact is often a big driver there. It's often funders that are giving to critical issues like reproductive justice, criminal justice reform, democracy, issues that they see as like very pressing right now. They really want to see big impact not only within their lifetimes but within within kind of the foreseeable future. So that's been an interesting trend, somewhat of an unexpected trend for us, but we are seeing more of our clients opting to spend down their endowments over the next, anywhere from 2 or 3 years to 10 years.
So sunsetting for us probably comes up every 5 years as we review our strategic plan, as we look at our vision and so forth. But I'm going to be honest with you, Joe. It's a topic that I get uncomfortable about because as you can tell, I still got about 15 years left before I retire. So talk about sunsetting is not a topic that I like to talk about. But anyway, we do have the conversation. And I've been through 2 conversations as it relates to this. As you saw in my bio, I joined the Turrell Fund back in 2016. And the year that I joined, they decided to have this conversation. And I remember saying to them, I wish I knew you guys were talking about this before I joined, But, we always end up back to the perpetuity conversation and not the sunsetting because, challenges that come up today, they may evolve, but there are challenges that are still there. Maybe not the same one, different ones, a few years down the line. So we feel like we serve a purpose by being around in perpetuity and being able to fund these organizations that are doing this great work and have an impact in communities. So that's the conversation we have. Like I said, I don't like talking about this.
No, thank you both. And I know that for we've long seen foundation, as everyone knows, foundations can be formed either as a trust or as a corp, and we've long seen foundations formed as trusts, with some of those target dates in mind, whether it's a target date after the next generation or something like 2050 or what have you. I think that those were some of the sunset dates of old, but I think that an important takeaway is, and what we've heard from the legal community as well, is just, honoring donor intent, with regards to how those foundations were formed, what are they considering with regards to that as well. And again, when we say that we hear an uptick in it, I think it's still a relatively small subset of the larger foundation world. Would that be fair to say, Amy? It's just more than what maybe we used to see.
More than what we used to see, but still, yes, still in the minority for sure. But we've just noticed it as an uptick, as you're saying.
Oh, awesome, thank you. I think we touched on just about everything that we wanted to talk about, unless I'm missing something. I know Rich is keeping score back at the office. So Rich, was there anything, or Amy, was there anything else that you wanted to cover? Any kind of final thoughts before we turn it over to Q&A?
No, I think for me, we covered it all. I got all check marks here.
Okay, Amy?
Yeah, same here.
All right, great. So I'm going to invite Scott back, and Scott was monitoring the Q&A. And for those of you who are still on the call, it's great to see so many of you. Feel free to drop in a few questions. Scott's going to go through them and go back and forth. But this is, I'm actually going to pause while we start to populate some of those questions. Maybe we'll do that next polling question now, and then we'll do the final one after Scott's gone through some Q&A. So has your foundation's due diligence over grantees changed since the COVID pandemic? Yes or no? So let's give that a minute while some questions come in. Scott, do we have a few questions, Scott?
Yeah, we do. So one question that came in here, and I think this is directed towards Amy. Amy, is there certain things or certain types of information that not-for-profits needing funding have to do to get noticed or to get your assistance with RPA? I think a question coming in is you talked about the great work that RPA does and how you assist other foundations. So, there was a question coming in, I guess, for the maybe some grantees that this foundation works with, potentially networking with you or things along those lines.
Yeah, so we, our strength and the quality of our service really depends on us, our awareness and our familiarity with the nonprofit sector, which is very big. We can't possibly know every organization, but our work is only better the more we know. So we're looking to network and learn about, nonprofits work all the time. Whether we currently have a client that's going to be aligned with their work and want to consider funding them is another question, but our client base is changing all the time. We're having new foundations come to us for advice and for management all the time. So, and even if we don't have, because we're kind of like part of the whole kind of ecosystem of philanthropy, we have strong relationships with many other funders as well. So we do make a lot of introductions. We want to learn about organizations to see if we might have a donor client that might want to learn more about their work. So yeah, we're meeting with and learning about nonprofits all the time.
Sure. Wonderful.
Amy,
please.
Amy, that was my question. So,
I'll send
actually,
you our application, Rich.
Rich, so a question came in about the 990 workshop that you run. I know this is something that we kind of talked about previously, and you touched on it today. And is this something that you open the workshop to non-financial foundation members who want to learn more about how to read 990s, nonprofits? So it seems like this question is geared around, you're doing this for your grantees, but is this also something that you or the Turrell Fund does for the foundation world who might need further education?
So that is something we do for also our peer foundation. So I play both sides. I do the due diligence on the funder side, and then I, walk over to the other room and I tell the grantees what I just told the funders they need to look out for. So it is something that I do for non-financial, like program people of foundations. A few years ago, we did one for Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. So yes, so to answer the question, it is something.
Yeah, and I'd also like to touch on, there are some great membership organizations, foundation organizations, Philanthropy New York that has a financial series that does this through, I believe it's through the month of March. Also that if, you know, people are looking to perhaps gain further knowledge on, there's resources out there as well for that. So one question that came in that I think is for both of you here is, what kind of trends or how do you feel about certain trends in the nonprofit writing to a foundation, and I guess, you know, some cross-funding potential with major issues like poverty. So I guess that's maybe a particular issue that's coming up here. You know, I don't know if, Amy, this is more towards you or Rich, but is this an area that you see coming up that you're tackling? And is there, you know, I guess a particular sort of type of grant applicant that's coming in for that?
About poverty, talking about kind of issues like poverty that cut across many. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I would say a growing number of private funders are identifying inequality as kind of the problem that drives all other problems in some ways. Like the Ford Foundation, you know, when Darren Walker came in, he kind of reoriented the Ford Foundation's entire portfolio toward inequality. That was kind of the biggest example, but many have followed suit or have at least kind of recognized the role that inequality and, you know, inequality of opportunity plays in so many related social issues. So I don't know if people define it as poverty specifically, but, you know, those kinds of issues I'd say is absolutely a you know, growing area of interest for foundations, and you know, even funders who hadn't thought of themselves as kind of you know, equality and opportunity funders before do think of themselves in that way, whatever their issue area is. You know, I work with a family foundation that does a lot of funding in classical music and the arts. They had not thought of themselves as a, you know, a DEI kind of funder, or as a funder that was sensitive to issues of inequality, and they really do now. So, you know, these are issues that cut across, you know, arguably every program area that philanthropy is tackling. So yes, I think being able to articulate those issues in a proposal will resonate with more and more funders today.
Sure.
Absolutely, and I can tell you that some of our grantees are including that as part of their funding request as it relates to poverty, homelessness, food scarcity, you know, and issues like that. So that is something, that is an uptick that we're seeing in the requests.
A question that came in, it talks about with the grant applications, and maybe Rich, this is more for you, but you had mentioned about general operating grants and being less restrictive. Some organizations now or foundations are seeing grant applications that have a request for indirect use. So if it's program specific, the grant applicant said, can we use, let's say, 10% of the funds to fund our back office administration? Is that something that the Turrell Fund looks at, or may say no, or is that something that is becoming more prevalent in the grant making community?
We would definitely consider it. Because we view the organizations that we fund as a whole. And as I mentioned before, we're going more towards general ops now than program specific. But we haven't gotten many requests, you know, where they break it out between indirect and direct. They just submit the application as a whole, or program specific, whatever the request is. But it is something we definitely would consider. We wouldn't, you know, shy away from that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Looks like you both have answered all of the questions that came in. You know, I want to just thank you both for the time that you spent today. I thought it was very enlightening, very educational and informative. Joseph, thank you for moderating this spirited discussion. You know, I hope everybody enjoyed the time today. One thing that we alluded to, at the beginning and sort of through the discussion, and just wanted to highlight again, is just the potential for the bad actors out there currently with, the bank crisis. Just be aware of those situations. But just thank you everybody for today. And I guess I'll pass this off to Harleen to take us through some housekeeping items. And Joe, we have one more CPE question, right?
Yeah, just before we do that. So again, on behalf of all of us here at PKF O'Connor Davies, thank you to our two speakers. Harleen, can you please launch the final polling question? Thank you so much for all of your help too,
Yes.
Harleen.
And there's no wrong answer to this one.
All right, great. So again, thank you to everyone for joining. To reiterate everything from Scott, Anan, myself, thank you. And Harleen, can you just bring us through the final points here?
Of course. So again, thank you to our speakers and thank you everyone for attending. Please remember to complete the short survey prompted at the close of this webinar, and a recording of today's webinar will be made available to attendees via email within the next few hours, and it will also be available on our Insights page on the pkfod.com website. Again, thank you again and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.